So today we are here with Anais Gonzalez, a activist Nicaraguan American. She was born in Los Angeles, California, and is one of those persons that I call my friend. Thank you, Anais, for being
Hi.
here with me. It's honestly a pleasure, and every time I talk to you through text, through social media, it's always a pleasure to be talking with you.
Well, no, I'm happy to be here. Like I always said, I admire this platform and everything, so it's really an honor for me to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you. And to everyone that is listening, Anais is actually one of those persons who's always recommending people. So most of the people who have interviewed here has come because Anais has recommended it to us, or we get in touch with her, and then like, she puts us in touch with somebody. So we really, really appreciate that from you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, no, my pleasure. I'm like, oh, like where can I speak? I'm like, oh, try them. I was looking for new content.
Yeah. So I have said in a past episode, today in the entire month of April, I always, because of the connection that I have with Anais, and because of how much I have learned from her, I try to always April to be, and whenever of course, but mostly April to focus on Nicaragua, as when we talk about Central America, I feel like there's always three countries that is outside of the topic, and one of those is always Nicaragua. So um, that's why April, I was like, okay, let me go back and continue to emphasize and to continue have the conversation about Nicaragua, because many of us, continue to learn it, and many others maybe not don't know much about it. So this episode is actually not coming out on April 19th. So as I have known you and I for the past, I don't know, years. I don't know how many years.
Year or
uh,
two, I think 2 years.
yeah,
Two.
yeah.
I think almost a three.
Yeah, almost
No,
a three.
almost a
Yeah,
three.
because I think I met you when you were almost graduating from season. So yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like the last
Yes.
semester. We want to focus mainly of what is Nicaragua, and Anais is a very active activist. She's always bringing the light to all those problems that we might overlook, and to those struggles to the people of Nicaragua, not only inside of Nicaragua but outside of Nicaragua. So for those Anais that might not be familiar with what happened on April 2018, can you tell us a little bit
Mm.
of the events? How did it, kind of like the timeline, and how did it happen?
Yeah, no, from April up until where we are now, or just strictly April?
Yeah, we can,
Okay.
yeah, from April to when we are now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so back in April of 2018, Nicaragua hits its civil unrest that has not been seen the way for a long time, right? What occurred was in the beginning of April, protests, small protests broke out, mostly by university students, to protest against the ecological burning of Indo Maiz. Um, what happened during this time was the basin was burning, but the government, Ortega and his wife, also vice president, and I have to emphasize that his wife is the vice president because it's a crucial part of the regime.
Mm-hmm.
And so what occurred was the students went out to protest for the ecological burning. They demanded for them to, stop the burning, but in fact, Ortega and Murillo denied help. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, what stopped the fire was rain
Mm-hmm.
or something. But Nicaragua has been having this problem, and it really escalated with deforestation and environment with Ortega and Murillo in power.
Mm-hmm.
So then 2 weeks later, like what precisely April 18th, um, the government, when Ortega changed the Social Security pensions, right? And what doing the Social Security pensions, what happened is they were gonna increase them, and then most of all that profit was gonna go back to Ortega and el gobierno and all,
Mm-hmm.
and his politicians. So what occurred was so this is the tipping point, right? April
Mm-hmm.
18th. What occurred was you already had university students protesting the ecological burning of Indio Maiz. When the Social Security pensions plan occurred, the change occurred,
Mm-hmm.
you had all, the old Nicaraguan, los viejitos, pues,
Mm-hmm.
que salieron a protestar. So then you have a joint unison with university students protesting, and you have the unison with ahora los viejitos, los ancianos, everybody who, with their pension plan protesting. So you have this joint unison. I mean, and what you saw on April 18th, and this is where really was like okay,
Mhm.
that's it. Like we're not gonna do this anymore. We're not gonna be quiet anymore. Was when the government sympathizers, or you could say in this case, like La Juventud Sandinista,
Mhm.
right? Which is like, I mean, I don't want to quote unquote, but like delinquent groups, right?
Mhm.
Por parte del Partido Sandinista de Ortega, they went out and they began to throw rocks. Comenzaron a asediar y le pegaron mucho a los ancianos, and they also started to target journalists.
Mhm.
So this happened on April 18th. Um, and I remember the way, and it actually came out like on, I'm not too sure, but it came out in some of the news outlets, right? Like, oh,
Mhm.
protests broke out in Nicaragua on April 18th due to some social security pension plans. Y, and so what you have occurring in April 18th is that ya por la noche se van asumiendo más gente, right?
Mhm.
Ya por la noche se van asumiendo más universitarios. Now you see it in the capital, that the capital is now in different parts of Nicaragua.
Mhm.
They're already starting, mostly the youth, right? In this case, of course, alongside the ancianos, they started to like, ya comenzaron pues a hacer más bulla.
Mhm.
Um, by April 19th, um, ya, o sea, it was full on. The people, the Nicaraguan people, the university students started to take not take down, but they started to, ay, ¿cómo se dicen? Se comenzaban a ponerse en trincheras, ¿verdad? En sus universidades. So
Mhm.
they started to occupy the universities. um, People began, and when I say people, I mean majority of all Nicaraguans, right? From all
Mhm.
sectors. You have elites, gente rica, gente,
Mhm.
gente de la media, middle class, poor class. You had the peasants. You had the Atlantic coast. You had
Mhm.
migrants from all sectors: the LGBTQ community, the trans community, the feminist community. You had the Catholic Church. You
Mhm.
had like migrants from all sectors, right? Began to protest. They
Mhm.
began to protest, um, and for several reasons, right? But what really happened here was, and this is where like it gets ugly, is when Ortega and his wife Murillo give the okay and the order to attack and shoot. So on April 19th, you have paramilitary groups, parapolice, you have government sympathizers, you have La Juventud Sandinista, and you have them with armed, you know, este, ¿cómo te podría decir? Con armas de fuego,
Mhm.
armas de guerra, shooting at its people, shooting at these protesters. I'm talking, you're seeing on your Facebook Live,
Mhm.
like live tiroteos. You see it on your Facebook Live. I mean, I'm seeing this on my Facebook, right? Like
Mhm.
you're seeing this on my Facebook, on my Twitter. You're seeing, los primeros caídos, los primeros heridos.
Mhm.
Um, and it gets uglier as time go. Um, right? It gets uglier. But I think where I really want to like focus is the certain demands that there was, what was happening. So why up until April 18th? Why so long? If
Mhm.
Ortega has already been power back in April 2018 for 12 years, right? It
Mhm.
3 years ago. Yeah. So why so long? And I think there have always been protests in Nicaragua. I mean, the first protest you saw in Nicaragua came from the peasant community, but the Movimiento Campesino, when they started to
Mhm.
when they started to say, like, hey,
Mhm.
you guys are taking our land because of the supposed canal, right? That there is going to be
Mhm.
like Taiwanese or Chinese base. So protests have always been there. The thing is that everything has been very hush hush. So
Mhm.
Ortega and his wife Murillo had done a very good job in making it very secretly, um, sending out their military out there, but in a very hush manner, right? Very secretive manner. What happened in April 18th that's very different from everything is the fact that que la violencia y el estado policial and
Mhm.
everything llegó a la capital. You
Mm.
know what I mean? So
Mhm.
instead of it went from urban area and it hit
The capital.
it went from rural area and it finally hit Mecca. It hit home.
Mhm.
It hit where it's vividly for everyone to see. It hit
Mhm.
university students. It hit the civilians who live in the rural areas of Nicaragua. It hit the cities. So that's why it's a big tipping point, porque ya no
Mhm.
lo estamos viendo o ya no lo sabemos qué está pasando en el campo
Mhm.
o en la costa atlántica. It really hit, the city,
Mhm.
which is why it's very violent and it's very crucial. April 2018. So Nicaraguans have always been uprising, right? But April 18 was the tipping point, and like I mentioned, there are certain reasons why. A lot of it has to do for the fact that Ortega, since he came back to power in 2006, he has not led for free and fair elections. He has closed for oppositions to run, and he's been literally controlling everything judicial. His family owns all means of communication. So those were all this chaos and all this like silent that was going on for so long. Um, April marked like
Mhm.
the tipping point, for people, especially university students,
Mhm.
finally like they weren't like, oh wow, there's a real problem here in Nicaragua, and if we don't say anything, it's gonna stay. So now so that was April. So April, the year 2018 was very ugly for Nicaraguans.
Mhm.
According to international community, to the Human Rights Org, the Inter-American, la CIDH, right when they did a whole report saying that Ortega, Murillo, and the regime are committed crimes against humanity. I'm talking about where during this time we see the most Nicaraguans is to begin to exile,
Mhm.
political persecution. There is a point where we have 600 political prisoners from April 2010. We had, according to the human rights reports, that they accounted that in the matter of April up to September, October, around that area, they accounted for 384 estimated death.
Mhm.
Those are the ones that are counted. Of course, we don't have the ones that were los desaparecidos. We don't know how much there is.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, you have cases of rape,
Mhm.
cases of you know, um, women losing their baby
Mhm.
because of getting beat up. You have cases of being ejecutado,
Mhm.
people siendo ejecutados durante este tiempo. I mean, think about like you had the event of La UNAM Managua, which was
Mhm.
a students took over the UNAM Managua, a university in the capital, and they were estaban como en fuego por más de 12 horas, if I'm not mistaken, 19, 20
Mhm.
hours, almost a whole day of puro tiroteo que le estaban tirando los paramilitares.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, you had, and this not just happened in
Mhm.
the capital, it happened in the cities.
Mhm.
So a crucial part of from April up until now, during like this is when I say maybe around July, you have Operación Limpieza.
Mhm.
So what Operación Limpieza does, it's literally the crackdown. So
Mhm.
Nicaragua estaba, como dicen, en barricada.
Mhm.
Pusieron barricadas por todas las
Mhm.
ciudades de Nicaragua casi. Y cuando pasó la operación limpieza era cuando entran los paramilitares y las parapolicías,
Mhm.
and they literally, o sea, they bring down las barricadas.
Mhm.
Um, and what happened here, this is where, during Operación Limpieza, this is where they get the most political prisoners. This is where people are actually forced to exile,
Mhm.
and journalists are forced to leave. So yeah, during that part. I mean, there's so many like details
Mhm.
that I know that I'm missing out, but they're just so like it could get a little bit too heavy for people, like to be like, oh my god, Anais, or like, oh my god, that's so much.
Mhm.
But think about it that I mean, many not people want to know, but
Mhm.
Nicaragua does live in a police state, right?
Mhm.
So where is Nicaragua now after April 2018? So now you don't see people, like you don't see, what we saw in April
Mhm.
2018, cuando la gente va y el paramilitares te matan.
Mhm.
Pero, you know, they're still killing people. I mean,
Mhm.
it's a lot of it is it's done by in the rural areas of Nicaragua. How the government has been managing COVID-19. So, Nicaragua has had one
Mhm.
of the most erratic response to to the pandemic. I mean, when the
Mhm.
world was going into lockdown, right? Like back in March, Nicaragua instead promoted um, large conglomerations. They came out saying love in times of
Mhm.
COVID-19. So they went out parading. These are governments, but this is the government, right? They
Mhm.
went out parading. They never went into sort of lockdown ever. And they never did like some mass mandate anything. So
Mhm.
they just kind of let people kind of a free reign, right?
Mhm.
Of what we did see, it was a lot of what did occur in Nicaragua was there was a lot of late night burials. So if you died of COVID-19, they would bury you late. Sometimes they wouldn't even notify your family, and they would bury you. So eran como entierro secreto. You had doctors fired because a lot of doctors signed this they signed a kind of make like a petition saying, hey, to the government,
Mhm.
like, hey, you really need to get your act together. This COVID-19 is not like, you need to do something. So
Mhm.
those doctors who signed, they were fired. So um what did occur was, yeah, so I mean, nothing really has
Mhm.
I mean, there's really nothing that has helped Nicaragua combat COVID-19.
Mhm.
Borders kept open, hospitals have been overfilled, people have just been kind of just dealing with it, um, and relying on other sources to understand this whole pandemic.
Mhm.
I believe right now in Nicaragua, if you want to get a COVID vaccine, either A, you have to work for the government for you to get one fast, or you have to pay. Oh, sorry, to get a COVID testing. I'm sorry. If you
Mhm.
want to get a COVID testing, it costs about $150. Think about it. This is expensive
Mhm.
with a country that to make $10 a day is almost impossible,
Mhm.
right? Especially for the more impoverished. If you want to, I mean, we in Nicaragua already got vaccinations,
Mhm.
right? We got it through Russia. Russia
Russia.
was one of our
Mhm.
donors. Russia was one of our donors, but the thing is, the vaccine is politicized.
Mhm.
So I'm sure right now Ortega and his whole family already have the double vaccine. And I'm pretty sure if you have enough money to
Mhm.
pay for a vaccine, you could probably see how. But
Mhm.
and I think the other vaccine that enter is La Covax, which I think is like the UNICEF one, the one that they give to the more poor people. But I'm not too sure how
Mhm.
they're gonna manage on giving that one out to the rest of the Nicaraguans, right?
Mhm.
But I'm sure the Russian ones, that's the one that's most likely being given to the family or
Mhm.
those people.
Yeah.
So that's the pandemic. Then if you want to, then with the hurricanes,
Mhm.
as I mentioned back in November, Nicaragua gets the nasty bunch of the hurricanes. So one Hurricane 4 and Hurricane 5, right? Aera and
Mhm.
what was it, the other one? Ya
I
se me olvidó
Eta
los
y
nombres.
Iota.
Yeah, Eta y Iota,
Yeah, I
right?
called them in Spanish. I don't know how to. I'm like Eta y Iota.
I forgot how they were. Yeah. So what happened with the hurricane was, it literally came through the Atlantic coast. And if you're not familiar with the Atlantic coast, Nicaragua is the most forgotten region, the most
Mhm.
forgotten people actually of the entire country. This is where most of the indigenous and Afro descendant communities live.
Mhm.
Um, and so it literally like destroyed like what do you call the North Caribbean coast. However, Ortega, of course, did get his. I mean, he got a lot of money
Mhm.
for to try to to take care to try to rebuild
Mhm.
the coast, the Atlantic coast. But a lot of the money and the aid is not seen. We don't know where it's. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
who knows?
I don't know.
So a lot of the stuff, in order to help rebuild the Caribbean coast, it's really done through mutual aid. Um, the the government began again to politicize the aid. So si el gobierno daba su ayudita, it was politicized, with the stamp of
Mm-hmm.
Ortega. But a lot of the stuff has come through mutual aid, and it's been difficult because
Mm-hmm.
it had to be done in a way that you didn't attract so much attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because in the sense, when I say it was being politicized, it was that the police were probably outside a church, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
kind of seeing, oh, o te pararon, o te paran, to see
Mm-hmm.
like where you're going. Oh, like te vamos a llevar. A lot of the opposition um, wasn't allowed to go to the Caribbean coast to give aid. So, I mean, it's just kind of those
Mm-hmm.
things like um, that in Nicaragua it just doesn't stop. It's just
Mm-hmm.
one thing after another and after another, and yeah,
That's been a lot in 3 years.
yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, just from April 2018 up until December,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
From
Yeah.
April up into this, yeah, from April 2018 to December, that's where you have Ortega and Murillo clearly making it illegal to protest. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, illegal. Like in Nicaragua, you cannot protest. Like, ni protestar for nothing. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
can't. For International Women's Right,
Mm-hmm.
the way that the women protested was de una manera clandestina. So they did it clandestinely, la protesta. So it's a very,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
very like, really no room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
Hmm.
that's one of my questions. Like I said, many people might have seen, through Twitter, which is where I saw it the most when it comes to Nicaragua on 2018, right? Like we have talked how, people play the role of, being, reporteros with their own phone because the media outlets
Yeah,
are paid, and controlled by Ortega. So, but after people are like, oh, that happened in Nicaragua and that's it. But like nobody, no, we don't talk about the after, we don't talk
yeah.
about how many
Hmm.
people left the country because of Operación Limpieza. Like the moms, we don't talk about,
Yeah.
cuántos muertos hubieron o todavía siguen, cuántos todavía siguen en la
Hmm.
cárcel, how many were like incarcerated, how many, people have been raped, have been disappeared. So there's like only in that
Yeah.
year it has been a lot. And I mean, and then top it off with, when it comes to what's it called, COVID. Like that was something that for me was kind of like, why are they doing a parade? Like I was like, why are they doing a parade? And
Yeah.
I mean, um, in the case of, like I always tend to say, like, the el sistema de salud en Centroamérica está totalmente colapsado. Like we don't have a
Yeah.
health system. So imagine like I
Yeah. I
was.
mean,
Mhm,
there's, yeah, like, I mean, there's one thing of, okay, I mean, we could admit that, in Central America or in general Latin America, right? It's not
mhm,
gonna have the health system that we have here in the United States or in
mhm,
other, top Europe, right?
mhm,
Um, but it's very different when the government is really telling you
mhm,
and your citizen that COVID isn't real, that
mhm.
COVID doesn't exist. I mean, that's a whole other ball
Yeah.
game they're playing at,
Hmm.
you know?
And then it is very interesting how you mentioned, because um, knowing like how politicized what's it called, Nicaragua is, like everything has been politicized. Like I was telling you
Hmm.
before recording, that I was something that I found out like last episode, like that you cannot even go to llorar o ir a, ¿me entiendes? Hacer una misa a alguien que murió, during those
Yeah.
protests, knowing, no puedes protestar. So there's a bunch of things that comes into play of like people don't know about it. Like people might think, oh
Hmm.
yeah, pues eso pasó en Nicaragua, but that's it. Like what about the next
Hmm.
conversation? And yeah, then COVID comes, top it off, and the otro, and then the hurricanes, which is something that like you said, the government did get a lot of money, and that was something that I think we did discuss this through text. Like Ortega did donate money to Honduras you know?
Yeah.
And I was just like, why are he doing that and not helping his own people? You know? And I'm,
Yeah.
thank you, but not thank you. The same way I was like, thank you, but not thank you. How are you
Yeah,
gonna help
because he
another
donated to
country?
Honduras.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he donated to Honduras, and yeah, I mean, it's this is like I mentioned, it's like one thing after another.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I feel like Nicaraguans have already just kind of gotten like, whoa, ahora qué va a pasar? What's next? What's
Mhm.
next? What next strategy? You know, like we know any tragedy that's gonna happen, whether it's hurricanes, earthquake, it's everything's gonna be politicized. I mean, the worst part, sometimes the most like difficult part is like when you're here and you're having trying to explain to people that everything's done through mutual aid base,
Mhm.
and then you like myself, I'm not trying to get politicized because I'm really not. I'm not trying to make you hate Ortega,
Mhm.
right? Because I know people and their ideas. Everybody's
Mhm.
has their, you have your right to think how you
Mhm.
want. um but like it's really difficult. Like, how could I not unpoliticize something? How
Exactly.
do I, when everything like in Nicaragua is technically politicized? I
Mhm.
mean,
Yeah.
so
It
it's difficult.
Yeah, and then when it comes to the metro aids, during like November, when there was like massive sending of items and like sending of donation, and even today I know people still donating, which is amazing because I mean, people lost everything. They're not le vas a dar algo y ya se volvieron. They lost everything they have built through
They lost everything.
years. And I'm sorry.
Yeah, they lost everything. People did lose everything, like
Yeah,
everything.
exactly. So, um, when I was talking to you, because I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, like I only trust Anais to the information because of Nicaragua, just because there's so many misinformation about Nicaragua out there that sometimes you don't
Mm-hmm.
know which outlets are like, like, like real. So, when you were explaining that, it honestly hurt you. Like it hurts you knowing that when you're willing to help, sometimes you can't, right? Because you need to find
Yeah.
the people and then you need to do it like así va al bajo abajo, como le dicen, abajo de la mesa, or like you have to make the time to actually research and go for it because
Yeah.
it's not accessible. And then I remember
Yeah.
telling you like, oh, como dónde podemos llevar cosas para que manden a Nicaragua, because yeah,
Yeah.
one thing is like what Honduras, it got hit, but nobody talked how Nicaragua got almost like completely destroyed. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Yeah,
those
we got
those
completely
images are,
destroyed. Mm-hmm.
yeah, those images in Honduras are impactful, but you cannot just focus on one without looking at the other one who got it like that hit just right there. So I don't know, it's very sad to see, throughout the year how Nicaragua is often, like I told you before, often left out of the topic, often never
Yeah.
continue the conversation, never look
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah, the conversation of Nicaragua, I mean, we're always gonna be, you are part of Central America.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm not gonna deny it, but the conversation of just generally of Nicaragua, it's really not gonna be, well, especially in today, right? Let's talk,
Hmm.
like if we're talking about present time,
Hmm.
Nicaragua is always gonna be onto put into like other spaces, right? Like
Hmm.
if they're gonna talk about Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, right? We're
Hmm.
gonna go with them, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. But when it comes to kind of to Central America in general, it's, I mean, I don't want to use a term, but it's the term that media uses. But
Hmm.
and just to make a point, they're gonna use the Northern Triangle, right?
Hmm.
Guatemala,
El
El Salvador, and
Salvador y
Honduras.
Honduras. Hmm.
But in Nicaragua, no. And
Exactly.
I mean, there are several reasons, and I understand why, right? Um, but like of course, right? Nicaraguan migration,
Hmm.
it has not been like El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras over the past years,
Hmm.
up until
Up north.
April 2018.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, up in 2018.
Hmm.
I mean, Nicaraguans, we weren't much migrating.
Hmm.
And people think it's because, well, when Ortega comes back into power, Nicaragua is still considered the safest country
Hmm.
of Central America during that time, and it was.
Hmm.
But I don't think it has to. I mean, and it was the safest country.
Hmm.
But I think sometimes if we put into and if we analyze it, why was it the safest country?
Hmm.
Well, Ortega was controlling practically everything.
Hmm.
I mean, and that's something that we don't people don't want to analyze. Okay, Nicaragua was the safest country at that time, but on the other aspect, it's being controlled by a whole family,
Mhm.
you know, like uh, but like it's kind of like unleveled. So Nicaragua, we weren't migrating
Mhm.
in quantities like that. Now we are. Now, when April 2018 it hit, but even then, most of our migration went to Costa Rica,
Mhm. That's what
right?
we were gonna
Because
tell
there,
you.
como te, yeah, because there's this hope and this esperanza de que se van a ir pronto, and that we're just in Costa Rica. All we're gonna do is just come on over, right? We're just gonna come on over.
Mhm.
But I feel that that might change. That shift might change now. Now, I think. I mean, there
Mhm.
are
Yeah, cause
cases
that,
of
yeah,
Nicaraguans
cause that's what
of
I was gonna
Nicaraguans
tell
coming
you.
to the States. I know there's a huge
Mhm.
community of Nicaraguans in Spain. Um, so now the shift is kind of gonna change. Now I think we are gonna see more migration of Nicaraguans trying to come to the United States a little bit more, because what's gonna happen is
Mhm.
in Costa Rica, a lot of Nicaraguans lost their jobs because of the pandemic. So some of them had to go back to
Mhm.
Nicaragua. Hay unos que se were just like, screw it, we're gonna go back to Nicaragua, you know, se tomaron el riesgo y regresaron. But that's another tricky
Mhm.
thing, because if you're exiled in Costa Rica and you decide to come back to
Mhm.
Nicaragua, you're gonna face some consequences. Like you could get arrested and
Mhm.
taken to jail,
Mhm.
or you could get shot at the, we don't know, they could take you into custody. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of risk factors. They could
Yeah.
assassinate you. um and now we have, well, now with the US wasn't, some people were like, oh well, they're granting asylum to Nicaraguans. I'm like, it's not
Mhm.
happening like that, really.
Mhm.
It's really not happening like that. But they're granting, some people have make it seem that they're granting us asylum, and it's like they're really not granting us asylum. Believe me. Um, there's so many cases that are like are stagnant. Que no tienen, they don't know, they don't have appointments. I
Mhm.
mean, so it's a really tricky. Um, but I think the shift might. I think after this whole kind of pandemic and everything's kind of starts to stabilize a little bit more,
Mhm.
we're definitely going to see more migrations of Nicaraguans. And the Nicaraguans that are already migrated here, I mean, there are university students that migrated here. Um, and those are the new generations of Nicaraguans
Mhm.
that are migrating because of political persecution.
Mhm.
And that was seen in the previous, history.
Mhm.
That, right? So it's a whole other new generation um, migrating
Yeah.
of political persecution in Nicaragua. So yeah, Nicaragua is always gonna be um, left out of that convo of Central America.
Mhm.
And I mean, I get why, I get why it's kind of left out. It's understandable, but at the same time, it's like kind of like, wait, I mean, Nicaragua is still technically part of Central America. If we're
Mhm.
trying to promote this whole pan American, pan Central American narrative, then
Mhm.
why leave out Nicaragua?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's just
Exactly.
things that you could question, play devil's advocate.
Like, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, and it's true how you say, they often like, se que se, ¿cómo se llama? Se refieren a the Northern Triangle and this and that,
Hmm.
but vete un poquito más para el lado, está Belice, un poquito más para abajo, está Nicaragua, está Costa
Yeah.
Rica,
Hmm.
and está Panama, so like they're literally taking out four countries, right? That, yeah,
Four countries.
just because they're not migrating up north as much, but if you see the
As
migration,
much.
yeah, but if you see the migration of Nicaragua, most of them migrate, oh, like you said, to Spain or to the, ¿cómo se llama? Los países alrededor, or most likely to Costa
Yeah, and
Rica.
then yeah, and Nicaraguans, because we're fleeing political persecution very intensely. A lot of the Nicaraguans are. So se van a ir, a donde se van a ir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't mention so much of who has been affected on my family, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do have a whole family members that they left. That they're one of the very first ones to get political asylum in France.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and it's not that my family's, we're not rich Nicaraguans. It was
Mm-hmm.
just that given the chance, my family got a chance to go to France, and that's where they got the asylum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something kind of like pues a donde nos llevan, and um, we know how hard it is to get to United States because tienen que pasar por
Mm-hmm.
Mexico, and Mexico is a
Yeah.
whole other
Oh,
like
that's another thing.
um that's a whole
That's a
odyssey,
thing by
right?
its
That's Eso
own.
es una yeah, Mexico is toda una odisea for migrants.
Mm-hmm.
Not just Nicaraguan migrants,
No,
Venezuelan migrants,
for every
Cuban
migrant.
migrants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for every migrant, right? I mean, hay un dicho, prefiero que me agarre la migra de los Estados
Estados
Unidos antes
Unidos.
que me agarren los de México, right? Es un
Mm-hmm.
dicho que dicen, and there's a reason why.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, but in Nicaraguans, we have Nicaraguans in Panama, we have Nicaraguans in Colombia, we have Nicaraguans in Argentina,
Mm-hmm.
we have Nicaraguans in Honduras. But the problem with migrating to Honduras and even to Costa Rica is that todavía hay simpatizantes del gobierno ahí.
Mm-hmm.
So in some
Mm-hmm.
cases, it's still not even safe for them to stay in these countries porque hay simpatizantes del gobierno. There are
Mm-hmm.
cases that que la gente, like, I mean, I know some cases, you know, some
Mm-hmm.
cases, and I can't omit names and stuff, but I know some cases that they literally have to leave Costa Rica porque hasta ahí le llegaron las amenazas and they
I
had to
know.
migrate somewhere.
I'll be
So no,
like,
it's tricky.
bye. Let's go. Bye. No.
Yeah, so it's a very different migration. We're not just fleeing
Mm-hmm.
economical. But now as it gets more intense, as the regime continues to close every outlet, like it's literally like the tipping point this year.
Mm-hmm.
Migration, people are gonna migrate not just because of political persecution or because of stuff like that. Now people are gonna migrate really because of economical reasons as
Mm-hmm.
well. Porque no va a haber trabajo.
No.
No, o sea, it's a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I mean, migrating, I see as a human right, and
Hmm.
for me, it is a human right. And to go as, another country asylum, for political like what's it called, persecution, for violence and everything. I mean, is a right that you have. Just because this country, in this case of Nicaragua, people tend to leave it out of the conversation when someone comes to you and say like, "Oh, I'm fleeing because of political persecution." You shouldn't doubt it. You shouldn't be like, really, like Nicaragua. You know what I mean? Because they don't often say like, oh, what's going on in Nicaragua. I tend to see
Hmm.
that type of reaction, and I'm like, like, really, don't say that.
Yeah.
Because and like I said, a lot of it has to be a place with the media, especially here, like here in the United States, like international media outside of Nicaragua. We already know the media in Nicaragua, and but yeah, so a lot of the reason why Nicaragua's conversation is always left out has to be a lot with the media. But like you said, sometimes we don't want to be políticos. We don't want to be like, oh, pues no dijo Ortega, or like, this is my stance. You know what I mean? Because that's
Yeah.
not the reason. Like, I can tell you, oh, things, and you might have another opinion. That's okay. That's okay. Um, but a lot of things, the reason why some people, and I will continue saying, some people and some media don't want to coverage what has going on in, like, in Nicaragua, especially from the international point of view, is because of the political views, you
Yeah.
know.
It's
So,
political views. I mean, we still have people who sympathize with Ortega, or they sympathize, with the
mm-hmm,
with the whole thing he's supposed to represent. I mean, by all means, you do you. I
mm-hmm,
mean, I don't sympathize with Ortega,
mm-hmm,
but that's because there's already proof. There's
mm-hmm,
proof, and there's a
mm-hmm,
trace, and there's a trail that says that Ortega has caused crimes against humanity.
mm-hmm,
The regime Ortega and Murillo has. So there's a whole trail,
mm-hmm.
paper trail,
Yep.
that says they've done. They abuse human rights.
Yeah.
So I
Hey.
mean, cada quien,
Yeah.
cada quien. I mean, like I always mention to people, like I'm not here to try to. I'm really never like. I got into a point where like I'm not here to convince other people to don't support Ortega. I'm
Mhm.
literally just telling you that this is what they've done.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. No, and I feel like it's a valid point because like I think I have said it before, it's like many people will sympathize to Ortega and the what the movement of Sandinista because of
Yeah, of
of the
course.
history, right? Of the history, how they came up, how they happened in the 80s and everything. But we can, ¿cómo se llama? No nos podemos hacer ciegos, like that movement
Mm-hmm.
does not represent the present. That is not.
Yeah.
That's not reality. So it, at the same time, como siempre voy a decir, we need to evaluate ourselves and evaluate everybody because it's like, what if you supported that movement, but you don't see it that is presented right now? It's like, okay,
No.
maybe not to,
I think, I mean,
Mhm,
there's still just this romanticized image
mhm,
of el sandinista o el sandinismo,
mhm,
because it's what we've been taught, you know. Ahí
mhm,
está la revolución nicaragüense, que topó la dictadura de Somoza.
mhm,
And I mean, there's more in depth to actually how it really happened,
mhm,
There's more in depth into the failures of the revolution
mhm,
so early on, right? um, like erasing the participation of the women right after 1979. I mean, come on, dude. Nicaragua had the biggest women guerrillas of all of
mhm,
Latin America, and you are going to erase the image and kind of just set aside the participation of women
mhm,
when they helped you to win that cause. Like,
mhm,
those are the beginning failures, right, of the
mhm.
revolution. But those are things that people don't like to see because we're so stuck up on this romanticization of that la revolucion, la
Exactly.
revolucion. I mean, you see that with the Cuban one, you see that with the Bolivian revolution in Venezuela, this
Mhm,
whole romanticization of revolution. But the death and the reality is other, the
mhm,
reality for for the Misquito community of the Sandinistas is other. I
mhm,
mean, you had La Navidad Roja early on in the revolution, like in the 80s, where literally was displacing the Misquito community
mhm.
and killing them. O sea, that's what's called La Navidad Roja because during Christmas time, they were killing the Misquito community, the
Wow.
Sandinistas. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, yeah, like, of course, stay with your romanticized view your romanticized view of a certain revolution, but in death there's more,
Mhm.
of course.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to talk to you this today also is because we know about like, okay, we already told us what had happened since April 19th, right? What had happened since all these years, three years that have
Hmm?
come, we see the COVID, we see, like migration, we see, everything. But Nicaragua is actually going to election. So how is that
Yeah.
going with the election? I haven't looked. I'll be honest with you. I haven't looked. The who's running for president or the parties and everything. I haven't I haven't taken my time to read and everything, but how's the election going? And do you think these elections are like, of course, are they crucial, but would they lead, or would you have hope that they will lead to a more Nicaragua más libre, Nicaragua más, I don't know, con más justicia, I'll
To
say.
if you want my if you want my honest opinion, I
Mhm.
really don't I really don't see Ortega and his in the regime and his family and his everyone and his wife leaving for this election. In fact, Ortega
Mhm.
Ortega's whole point of him regaining and trying to control back to power in 2016 was for him to never leave presidency again. So his goal is to stay in the presidency as long as he can, right? And
Oh
making
God.
his wife VP was a strategic from her to be like, well, si algún tiempo este viejo, si mi esposo se va a Ortega, pues quedo yo en el poder. I mean, a lot of the things. So one thing that we need to understand is that Ortega is a whole different type, and his wife is a whole other ball game. I
Mhm.
mean, dicen la gente que the one who really controls everything is her, not so much him.
Mhm.
In fact, Ortega is actually more loved. He is more admired from people He
Mhm.
is more, um, he's el he's el revolucionario Ortega. In a sense, for some people, I mean, I'm not a fan of Ortega. I never really have been.
Mhm.
This is me, but it's because I am. I've learned my ways throughout the time and a lot of my family history as well.
Mhm.
Um, um, that in the sense Ortega, he's a little bit more admired.
Mhm.
Um, his wife, not so much. you know, like I mean, and when I say admire, I'm talking
Mhm.
about their sympathizers. So la gente que lo simpatiza, his followers. His
Yeah, yeah,
followers
yeah, yeah.
still admire him, but his followers
Mhm.
not so much to his wife. So it's a different dynamic.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
for some people, some people say, oh, cuando Ortega se muere, se va a salvar, se va a solucionar los problemas. And it's like, not so
No.
much porque queda la esposa,
Mm.
quedan los hijos,
Mm.
who all they know is, what they know is power
Mhm.
and
Power and
money.
money. Mhm.
Money, yeah. So it's a whole other thing. So I just know that for this year, because it is elections and our elections are supposed to held off in November. I believe May is kind of like the bridge, kind of like that middle ground. That
Mhm.
if Ortega is literally not opening any doors, which he has not, then all the international community, como la Organización de los Americanos Estados, the OAS,
Mhm.
the USA, the European Union, I think this is where they're gonna start declaring Nicaragua a dictatorship
Oh, okay.
for the international community, because the
Mhm.
international community works differently. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they're trying to give Ortega as many chances for him to open up democratic elections, and it's kind of just a pull. It's like the push they've been doing, like, hey, open them up. It's like, hey, open them up, open them up. If you
Mhm.
don't open them up, there's gonna be consequences. There's gonna be sanctions. There's gonna be things that's gonna change around.
Mhm.
Um, but he's not so I think it's just kind of it's just what it's gonna cause at the international level. It's just kind of like this change of just kind of change of things that now it's gonna be declared more of a dictatorship, even though for the international community, I mean, even though for the Nicaraguans it's already a dictatorship, but what it's gonna mark is a third dictatorship in the hemisphere, right? So Venezuela, Cuba,
Mhm.
and Nicaragua. hmm
Yeah.
So that, I mean, it's tricky because they're really not opening any
Mhm.
sign to anything. It's like they keep on closing more
Mhm.
doors, and I think the worst part of this is that Ortega's still in power. It's just gonna, I mean, va a haber más pobreza. I mean, it's already poor. I mean, we're still the
Mhm.
second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure if we're second or third, but well, no, we were second. But then I think between Venezuela, Haiti, and Nicaragua, we're up there in the three.
Okay.
So it's Venezuela, Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Just put us up there in the three. But I'm not too sure if the order has changed. But I think if we're gonna talk about how you're gonna see it on Google, it's still considered like
The second.
the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere
Mm.
after Haiti, and it's been like that for a while.
Wow.
hmm
Mm. Yeah. But that's what I was like questioning because I remember seeing like there was gonna be a debate, and I was wondering, I was like,
Presidential debate.
yeah, yeah. I think it was
Oh
like,
yeah,
yeah,
like,
it happened like in
well,
February,
no.
right?
Well, the thing is, the Nicaraguan opposition, right? Like
Mhm.
I guess you could say the opposition. I mean, because in Nicaragua, I mean, you also want to define opposition. Like, who is opposition, right?
Mhm.
Because to Ortega, I'm an opposition
Yeah.
because I don't oppose the support, even if I don't vote, but I'm considered a threat to his thing, right?
Mhm.
But in the context of opposition could be toda la gente que está en oposición a Ortega.
Mhm.
But then you have, your political opposition, right? Los políticos,
Mm.
who are really trying to maneuver, who are really trying to, they're the ones that go to the international community and say, hey, this is what Ortega's doing, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think, I don't want to, the opposition, that's a whole other like topic, right? But I guess de hablarlo de una manera más tibia, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more like más así, I think the opposition needs to be a little bit stronger, in the sense that they need to really kind of create
Mm-hmm.
this unity, like one kind of just unidad, right? That everybody could kind of just follow through and along and kind of hold on to that force of a one unity. But it's really hard to do that
Yeah,
unity,
like.
because you're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
so many different personalities, you're dealing with so many different characters,
Mm-hmm.
you're dealing with people who've been opposing Ortega for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're also dealing with people who've been close to Ortega for a while, but then they're not anymore. So how could you build that
Mm-hmm.
trust? How do you build that trust? It's really hard to create this type
Mm-hmm.
of unity. Um, in my sakes, I do think it's a fractured opposition. I do think it could. They could do better.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that they have to kind of just remember that, how could you go onto elections when there's still political prisoners, there are 10,000 people in exile, and you have 300 or more, mothers and fathers and tias and uncles and abuelos that are mourning the loss of someone, right? So it's really hard. Like, how do you go into elections for that? So that's where we are. I mean, getting to the whole depth of the opposition is a whole other cosa, pero bueno. But I do think that when it comes to November,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do feel that I don't really see Ortega opening up elections, and I don't really I mean, but I think after November, I think we're just gonna hit this point, pues ya está la dictadura, and
Mm-hmm.
what do you do? What do we do? What is Nicaragua needing? And I think
Mm-hmm.
what Nicaragua always needs is just space.
Mm-hmm.
Give Nicaraguans the space to talk about what they go through, give
Mm-hmm.
Nicaraguans the space to um to kind of end this romanticized myth of the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Give somebody like from Madres de Abril, de la Asociación de Madres de Abril, right, which is the
Mm-hmm.
association of the mothers of April who lost their son, to speak about their
Mm-hmm.
experience. I mean, there's some mothers that are in exile. Give spaces to actual Nicaraguans who were political persecuted, who were political prisoners, who this and
Mm-hmm.
that. Like, listen to them, like listen to their stories. I mean, you don't have to agree with all their thoughts, but
Mm-hmm.
the whole human right aspect to it, it's very sad and devastating.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just like, I mean, if we put into context, what if the dictadura stays after November? It stays, but just I think it's more of that push for academics and activists and
Mm-hmm.
media and everything that you need to know, or like anything that has to do with international community spaces
Mm-hmm.
like this, that just give them like 10 minutes every time to listen to their stories. Like, they have a lot to say, you
Mm-hmm.
know
Yep.
it's like, there's some who just want to speak about their experience and what happened to them and why they're here,
Mm-hmm.
or even speak about like them asking asylum. It's a whole
Mm-hmm.
other issue.
Yep. And then what I was
Hmm.
gonna tell you is that I don't know when you were explaining that about that he's not gonna open like that he might or he hasn't opened the door for election, and if the election doesn't happen by November, the international community will like declare a dictatorship. But I'm like, like you know what I mean. I'm like that will be late. you know.
It is late in the ball game. There's
Mhm.
some people, since when Ortega went back to power, people already knew. People already knew how ugly. Okay, no. some people, people knew. There's some people who knew. I mean, I remember I was there during election time. I was there when
Mhm.
Ortega went back to election in 2006, and again 4 years later in 2011. And I could tell you, like, las señoras,
Mhm.
de mi vecindario, from where my family is from,
Mhm.
del pueblito ahí, ellas decían, ay, a mí me da cosa que este señor vuelva a entrar al poder. And for a reason they're saying that, right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, people on the ground knew. It's just that the fact that you just didn't say anything porque sabías que era el sandinista, sabías
Mhm.
que era Ortega, People knew que no, 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 People just people people knew. Yeah, no, people knew. I
Mhm.
mean, people knew. For some people, they knew, like, oh, this is gonna get ugly. The thing is that we didn't know. I don't think a lot of Nicaraguans knew, and hay muchas heridas que no están sanadas,
Mhm.
from la revolución and all that stuff, that I don't think a lot of us were gonna anticipate such a
Mhm.
deadly and ugly and bloody uprising,
Yeah.
in like the one that we saw in April 2018. So la gente, si no sale, if during November 7th, si la gente no sale a protestar, I mean, they have every right. I mean, I understand why don't they, but at the same time, if
Mhm.
Nicaraguans come out during November to protest, I mean, they have every right too, because
Yeah.
at the same time, they're tired, you know.
Mhm.
So, I just think, Nicaraguans knew. There were some Nicaraguans that knew that it was gonna get probably a little bit tense, and
Mhm.
then once 2011 happened, where he's again through fraud elections,
Mhm.
it kind of starts to getting ugly. But you didn't see the cantidad de protestas, right? Because you
Mhm.
you just kind of knew, porque voy a ir a protestar. It wasn't
Mhm.
until all that, como te dijo, everything that they held up and kept up, and hold, like, that they they just have been suppressing. They
Mhm.
let it go in April 2018. And we also have to think about the people who still work for the government, but they oppose
Mhm.
the government, right? Because
Mhm.
really, if you're working for
Yep.
the government, that's only really the sueldo that you have.
Mhm.
If you don't really work for the government, that means you really don't have,
Yeah.
you
Like
know
that's the
money. So
only secure job.
yeah, it's only secure job per se. But there's a lot of people inside that don't necessarily agree to him, to they don't agree with him, but they can't say anything porque si no pierden el trabajo, pierden
Pues
todo,
sí.
and they don't want to exile because living in exile is hard.
Mhm. Yeah. Going to
So
another
this
country, trying to find job is hard.
so there's some people feel might as well just I'll stay here, digo nada, but it doesn't mean that they support. So it's a lot of different things that of poor Nicaragua.
Exactly.
Hay
Yeah.
mucha gente engañada. There are
Mhm.
some people who truly, truly believe in him,
Mhm.
truly believe him and his wife, and esa gente queda.
Yeah. So to end, Anais, and like the last question, and I know like we had this conversation before with Anais, and then I'll link the video in the notes. Um, it's hard, like to imagine like in a perfect society, a perfect country. You know what I mean? Um, but in a perfect world, hi. But in a
Mhm.
perfect world, what would you love to see in Nicaragua, and what would you hope for
Mm.
the future in Nicaragua?
Well, I would love to see, first of all, a Nicaragua that, for once in its historical lifetime,
Mhm.
right? Because Nicaraguans have a lot of fault to it too, is that it finally takes into consideration. I'm being serious. I think the first thing that Nicaragua needs to do in any type is they have to. I mean, they have to give autonomy, and they have to acknowledge and give
Mhm.
spaces to the Atlantic coast. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, that's the first section that they need to make peace with, and they need to make amends with, and they need to give them their autonomy, because es la región que ha sufrido de
Demasiado.
lo más. I mean,
Mhm.
right? The Atlantic coast.
Mhm.
I mean, that's one thing. Like, the moment that they forget the Atlantic coast, that's it. Like, you know, it's not like a great Nicaragua, or it's not the Nicaragua that I envision, because the first thing they need to do is that they need to take into consideration those people.
Mhm.
And I'm talking about in every way. Treat them as an equal, right?
Mhm.
Um, and don't mess up their dialect either. Like,
Mhm.
learn how to conserve their dialect.
Yeah.
And that was one of the errors of the Sandinista, was that they wanted to impose Spanish onto them when they had
Mhm.
their own dialect.
Yeah. Let
Why
them.
don't you just like have them learn Spanish and you learn their dialect too, solve problems. There you go, like, right, like,
Mhm.
I learn yours, you learn mine, and there we could both communicate.
Mhm.
So that's, I feel, that's one of the most important things. That's the very most important thing. And then I think after that, I think Nicaragua needs to do, um, you know, I envision more, and there has to be justice, and this whole thing of remembering. I mean, we cannot forget. Hay tiene que haber un, like, algo de memoria, for
Mhm.
todos los caídos. And I think that will be if Nicaragua in the future starts by focusing on those two themes, I do see a very bright future. And to really to stop, like, this whole thing of caudillismo, and
Mhm.
like, mm, el caudillismo that
Mhm.
many Latin American people adore. But I think if we focus on making sure the Atlantic coast is taken care of in the way that their people demand it, that the way they want it,
Mhm.
and find a way that the Pacific and the Atlantic coast could be like, okay, but that region cannot be forgotten at all.
Mhm. No. Mhm.
So those are the two things that I would like to see in a Nicaragua. And of course, a Nicaragua, I mean, it's so romanticized for me to say, but a Nicaragua for all, for
Yeah.
all, and justice for all the fallen, and justice for all the political prisoners, and remembering, man, a whole museum of what happened in
Mhm.
April up until now, like a whole museum of la dictadura somocista, of la dictadura de
Mhm.
Ortega and his wife, and los Murillo, we need to remember.